Hello, my name is David Prater. I'm the Preparedness Planner Lead at the Department of Ecology's Spills Program, and today I will be talking about oiled wildlife volunteers. So here's a brief overview of what I will be discussing during this presentation. I will first provide an overview of what a wildlife volunteer is. I will then touch on some lessons learned from the 2007 Costco-Busan spill in San Francisco, the 2015 Refugio spill in Santa Barbara, and the BP Gulf spill in 2010. These spills led the state legislature in 2011 to direct Ecology to implement a volunteer management system in the event of a spill in Washington waters. I will walk you through the process of registering to become a volunteer on our website, oilspills101.wa.gov. And then I will finish with a discussion about how and when volunteers will be activated in the event of an oil spill. So first off, what is an oiled wildlife volunteer? So volunteers vary quite a bit, and so does their background, their experience, their affiliation, and the tasks that they will be asked to help out with. What I hope to illustrate with these pictures is that no matter how experienced you are or how eager you are to get involved in the response, you will never be asked or allowed to put yourself or others in harm's way. Safety is always and will always be a priority in a response. And based off these two pictures, I think you could tell which of these spill responses was better equipped to ask or to task volunteers safely and effectively. Furthermore, oil spill volunteers will vary based on the type and size of the response, the needs of unified command, the training, experience, or perhaps licensing of the volunteer. Volunteers are tasked with low-risk activities and only after receiving proper training and protective equipment appropriate for their designated activities. Also, the use of volunteers will always supplement and never replace the work of professional responders. This is important to everyone. Not only is it important to keep yourself and those around you safe, but we also want to look out for the wildlife that we're trying to protect and rehabilitate. As much as we all might want to jump in and get our hands dirty, so to speak, that almost always leads to more harm than good. We have to remember that during an oil spill, these animals are probably undergoing the most traumatic event of their lives, and the stress caused by human contact, especially by untrained hands, can push them over their limits. So it's very important that we leave the high risk or high skilled jobs to the professionals. So here I'm going to continue on with an example of what not to do. Pictured here are some people reacting to the 2015 Refugio spill in Santa Barbara. Just off the bat, you will notice that there are little to no safety precautions in place. It looks like this guy here is even barefoot, which is bad because many oils can be harmful if touched, and their vapors are often toxic. And a bit more about the next few pictures you'll see. So you might notice that everyone in the frame here is using the same possibly familiar 5-gallon buckets. Well, right after the spill, Home Depot put out a radio ad advertising free buckets for people to take down to the beach and start scooping up oil. And I don't fault these people or Home Depot at all. Without knowing any differently, many of us would think to do the same thing. We see a horrific environmental disaster and we want to jump in and help. But this volunteer mishap in this photo was largely the result of poor and untimely messaging from Unified Command. They should have informed public early on about the potential dangers posed by the oil. They should have warned people to stay away. And they should have advertised sanctioned volunteer opportunities so that people have an organized, safe, and effective way to help out. Also important to note, in general, Washington, Oregon, and California can be viewed as states with strong volunteer cultures around environmental issues. This is great when it comes to having a motivated pool of volunteers after a spill, but only if there are plans in place to help ensure that volunteers are kept safe and that their work is directed to where it is most needed. That's why in this region, we have put a lot of time and resources into communicating with, registering, and educating people who might want to volunteer after a spill. Now for some background about the volunteer program here in the Pacific Northwest. So in 2011, the Washington State Legislature directed the Department of Ecology to implement a volunteer management system. Ecology was directed to work with the regional response community to update the Northwest Area Contingency Plan and to establish policy and guidance for the use of volunteers during a spill. Ecology was asked to develop a website in order to register volunteers, and that's oilspills101.wa.gov. And I'll refer to this website frequently throughout this presentation. So in this website, you could go and volunteer to become a volunteer. And once you're signed up, your information is stored in a database, and we are able to then call you out in the event of a spill. In a few slides, I will walk you through this registration process as well. And this website is also where you can sign up to stay informed about Pacific Northwest response information, trainings, spill regulation updates, etc. And lastly, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife provides annual training for oiled wildlife volunteers. This training is also an 8-hour HAZWOPER refresher, and it includes presentations from Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, and our wildlife response providers like Focus Wildlife. The training covers key health and safety information relevant to oil spill volunteers. It's usually twice a year, so sign up on the website to stay informed and get reminders of when this training is happening. So per the Northwest Area Contingency Plan volunteer policy, volunteers are called out in a prioritized way, beginning with what's called affiliated volunteers. Affiliated volunteers are individuals associated with an affiliated volunteer organization. And if you are associated with these organizations prior to an incident, then you will have priority when being called out. When you register on oilspills101.wa.gov, you have an option to select whether or not you are affiliated with a volunteer organization. And priority is given to these organizations because they can help manage their volunteers during a response and also help recruit additional volunteers through their own networks. Also, a volunteer organization often provides training that would expedite the volunteer onboarding during a response. And many of you listening to this presentation may fall into this category already. So if so, please get in touch with your volunteer coordinator of your organization to make sure that they have registered with us as an affiliated volunteer organization. And next is the non-affiliated volunteers, which are individuals not part of an affiliated volunteer organization. These are typically people that hear about a spill in their community and want to help out. After a spill has occurred, these convergent volunteers, as they're called, may express a desire to participate in a response effort, but often have little or no volunteer experience, especially with an oil spill. So importantly, all volunteers, no matter what type or affiliation, are an important part of the large response community, but they first require a robust volunteer program to be in place so that we can make sure that they are safe and effective. The Pacific Northwest response community is trying to get to a place to where we know that there is a robust group of people pre-registered and pre-trained in the event of a spill. Right now, we are very proud to say that we have over 1,500 people registered in Washington, but we really want this number to grow and to improve the training of this group. And importantly, everyone, regardless of training level or affiliation, will be provided with in-time training if called out for an incident. The training will vary depending on the response and the duties you're asked to perform. So the general policy accepted by the Northwest Area Contingency Plan is that volunteers will be used in low-risk activities and only after receiving safety training appropriate for their designated activities. If volunteers are used for higher risk activities such as wildlife rehabilitation or pre-cleaning of beaches, specialized training and in some cases licensing will be required. Also, the use of volunteers will always supplement and never replace the work of professional responders hired by the responsible party. And an important note about ensuring volunteers are protected and insured in the event of an accident. Typically during a natural disaster, such as flooding or search and rescue events, the Washington State Emergency Management Division and/or the Department of Labor and Industry will cover all the volunteers in the event of an accident. However, there is language missing in these laws and regulations with regard to oil spills. Currently, liability protections through the state will likely not cover oil spill volunteers. We're actively working on addressing this gap in coverage and looking to build some traction within the next few years. So what will happen typically in the event of a spill response is that once volunteers are called out and assigned to the response, the responsible party or the company that spills the oil will likely want to hire on the volunteers permanently as employees or contractors. And with that hiring on comes additional protections and insurance in case someone trips and falls or is otherwise injured. And there may be some who prefer not to take money from the company and remain volunteers, and that's perfectly fine too. It's a decision that you can make if and when the time comes. So how to register? This is the front page of the Oil Spills 101 website. On the top of the page, by the little red arrow there, is a link to register as a volunteer. Next to that link is also where you can register for the Vessels of Opportunity program if you happen to have a vessel that you would like to register for the response. And a bit more about the Vessels of Opportunity program. This came out of a lesson learned from past spills, including the BP Gulf spill in 2010. And back in that spill, if you recall, the BP spill just decimated the local fishing industry. And as a result, there was a surplus of fishing boats with nowhere to fish. So representatives from Unified Command approached these fishermen and women and asked them if they would be interested in working the response by using their vessels and their crews to transport supplies, carry boom, and other on-water response duties. This was a major success story from the spill because not only did these people supplement the response effort, but they also were able to recoup some of the economic loss as a result of the spill. So after hearing about this idea and it working out, the Washington Department of Ecology created our own VOO program. And oilspills101.wa.gov allows people with motorized vessels of all sizes to register their vessel and or crews like they would register themselves. And in the event of a spill, Unified Command can look at the list of registered vessels and call them out as the need arises. And this is the volunteer registration form that you will see after you click on the link I showed you in the previous slide. As you can see, it's a pretty simple form. You can select your affiliation if you have one, or you can register as an individual. And you also see that we ask for your address. Importantly, we will not use this information to contact you or send you mailers or anything like that, but it is very important when calling out volunteers because this allows us to search for volunteers based on the proximity to the location of the spill. So when will volunteers be activated? It is a common assumption that on day one of the spill, we will hit the help button to call up all able and willing people, but unfortunately, this is not how it happens. Volunteers can be a very important part of the response, but there is a lot that goes into planning and organizing the safe and effective use of volunteers. The call for volunteers, if there is one, will not happen until at least a few days into the response, because it takes a lot of people and a lot of planning to develop a process to identify what type of volunteers are needed, what tasks they are needed for, the ideal level and type of training volunteers would need, and then a process to manage all the volunteers once they arrive on scene. In a large spill response, there are hundreds or perhaps thousands of people and more thousands of pieces of equipment that need to arrive on scene in a short period of time. Logistically, this is very difficult. For example, during the oil spill drills that Ecology conducts with the oil industry, companies fly in 200 or 300 people to practice large-scale responses. But these events are planned. They know when it's coming. They have conference space rented, months in advance. They have their hotel rooms booked, their caterers planned, etc. But obviously in a real spill, we don't get an advance notice. So people and equipment will begin to cascade in, and the response needs to establish a footing before they can discuss the need for volunteers. Unified Command has to ensure that there are supervisors, equipment, food, transportation, etc. in place to keep the volunteers and the rest of the responders safe. So as we are planning the use of volunteers, we are also assessing the need for volunteers. This is done in stages, depending on who needs volunteers and when they need them. So during the first few days of the response, someone in the liaison unit will ask each section of the response if they may have a need for volunteers. Some examples might be, asking the Joint Information Center if they need volunteers to help with call centers and help field questions for the public. And they would ask the wildlife branch if they may need volunteers, and if so, which skills or training they would need. Operations sections and logistics sections will be asked if they need drivers, or maybe if you have a vessel, you could be employed as a vessel of opportunity. So once the assessment of volunteers is made, Unified Command is given the recommendation and must approve the use of volunteers. And depending on the size or the type of the spill, volunteers may not be needed, or maybe specialized volunteers with specific credentials or training like veterinarians will be needed. Every response is different. And however, if the need for volunteers is present, then we will start planning on when and who to call out and how to organize the volunteers when they arrive. So when everything has been done to prepare for volunteers, how do we call them out? One of the primary ways to do this is through Ecology's digital communication system called Jetty. Many of you have likely already received communications through Jetty, especially if you have already registered as a volunteer on the oilspills101.wa.gov website. Every year, we send out a few test messages during oil spill drills. And when this happens, registered volunteers in Jetty will receive a survey asking them if they are available and willing to participate in a response. In this survey, we will ask about the experience you have performing certain tasks, your level of training, and most importantly, your availability. Also, as the size and the particulars of the response changes, so too will the need for volunteers and the experience and training required. So if you are not initially called out to participate, that does not mean that you will not be called out later. Some part of the volunteer activation process is always in motion. Throughout the duration of the response, the volunteer unit will be actively assessing the need for volunteers, calling out volunteers, and/or onboarding and training volunteers. Thank you all very much. I hope this presentation provided a general overview of the oil spill volunteer process in the Pacific Northwest. I want to close by saying that volunteers are a very important part of the oil spill response community, and I hope you consider registering on oilspills101.wa.gov. And for those that are already registered, thank you very much. Again, my name is David Prater, and I want you to please feel free to reach out by phone or email if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.